watching Primetime. I'm Tamanna Inamdar.
And my name is Ayush Alavadi. Let's have a look at the headlines. US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un arrive in Singapore for the much-anticipated summit. The US says it plans to keep sanctions in place until North Korea eliminates its nuclear weapons capabilities.
Indian markets pair gains in late trade to close flat. The Sensex drops over 220 points from the day's high, even as Bharti Airtel and Bajaj Finance rally.
India's telecom battle intensifies. Bharti Airtel's revenue market share rises for the first time in 3 quarters, even as Jio closes in on the number 1 slot.
Government steps to appoint candidates outside the bureaucracy for the post of Joint Secretary for 10 ministries. This step has evoked criticism. Opposition parties call it an attempt by government to bring in people who share the same ideology.
Samajwadi Party President Akhilesh Yadav says his party will continue the alliance with Mayawati's BSP, even if he had to sacrifice a few seats to ensure the BJP's defeat in the general elections. All right, let's start off with the top story tonight. US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un are in Singapore for the much-anticipated summit. Ahead of tomorrow's negotiations, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. plans to keep sanctions in place until North Korea eliminates its nuclear weapons capabilities, but added that America is prepared to offer unique guarantees to ease the regime's security concerns.
Now, Kevin Cirilli of Bloomberg News is in Singapore. Here's his ground report.
Earlier today, he met with the Prime Minister of Singapore, Prime Minister Lee, and then he spent much of the rest of his day just hunkering down in anticipation of tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Asia time, 9 p.m. Monday evening time in the East Coast, where he will meet one-on-one with North Korea leader Kim Jong-un. And what can the U.S. offer North Korea? Well, an easing of sanctions, economic aid and investment, a reduction of U.S. troops in the region, which Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said earlier today is off the table, an assurance of no regime change, and diplomatic normalization. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also telling us reporters here in Singapore that he is fully committed to getting North Korea to say that they will completely denuclearize. He will accompany the president along with his Chief of Staff General Kelly to that meeting following an individual meeting between President Trump and North Korea leader tomorrow.
All right, now Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un happens just after he's finished a very bitter G7 round of meetings. It was not just the war of words between Trump and Trudeau. The U.S. president refused to even sign the G7 communique. Here's a report at the disaster that was the G7 meet. So after Trump torpedoed the G7 meet, what will this meet with Kim Jong-un? Remember, this is a historical one. What will this look like? What can we expect? And what is the possible reason that India should watch this very carefully? To speak on that, I'm joined now by Neelam Deo, a director at Gateway House and, of course, former ambassador. Thank you so much, ma'am, for speaking with us here at Bloomberg Quint. First, let's talk a bit about Trump and what we saw in G7. In the backdrop of that, what do you expect will be his stance at this very crucial meet in Singapore?
You know, it really depends. I mean, there is a whole range of things that could happen. Many people are predicting that it could just be a great photo opportunity. Others feel that because of the disaster that took place in the G7 meeting, there is even more pressure that Trump may want to declare victory with a success in the meeting with the North Korean. On the other hand, it is not clear at all that Trump thinks the G7 meeting in Canada was a disaster. He probably thinks it went off quite well from his point of view. So I think we should expect anything at all. It may be that if one of them arrives late, Trump may decide to walk out of the meeting altogether. On the other hand, I think he has spoken frequently on this. He seems to have put quite a lot of his own capital on some outcome in regard to North Korea. So I think this meeting will probably take place. It's expected to last, one-on-one meeting is expected to last 2 hours with interpreters. That's a long meeting. I think some kind of a general statement regarding denuclearization will take place. And his Secretary of State has already been making statements that denuclearization is a process. It's not a one-time event. So I think we should expect a statement which will speak about denuclearization and which will speak about lifting the sanctions that the Americans have imposed on North Korea, including working to lift the sanctions that have been imposed through the UN Security Council.
You know what also makes this entire series of events and meetings so exciting and uncertain in a way is the unpredictability of Trump himself. No one quite knows how it's going to go. In fact, he's been quoted as saying that I'll know in the first minute whether the meeting is working or not. I want to get a point of view on that from Raj Bhala, a distinguished professor at the University of Kansas, who's joining us now in that discussion. Very good evening, Raj. What can we really expect from Trump in the frame of mind he perhaps is in post the G7 fiasco?
Well, good evening and thank you for having me. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. This is obviously a very mercurial style of diplomacy. And sometimes when a deal is negotiated by this president, as we saw with the G7, if there's anything that he finds unsettling after the deal has been negotiated, he is more than willing and indeed will pull out of the deal. So even if he gets this gut feeling in the first 5 minutes, it's not clear that that gut feeling will remain the same in the last 5 minutes after the signing ceremony. So it is truly unpredictable. But let me try and give a little bit of basis as to what he may be thinking. And this brings together the trade and the national security pieces of the puzzle. The administration, both the president and Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, have argued pretty consistently that they view bilateral trade deficits as undermining American economic strength and therefore as undermining American national security. A large bilateral trade deficit, whether it's with China or with Mexico, undermines the core strength of our traditional industries in the U.S., and that in turn is the basis, those traditional industries, their health for our national security, the steel and aluminum. And so this is classic mercantilist. It's classic economic nationalism. We saw a version of it in the late 17 and early 1800s with Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton. So in terms of trying to put the most rational and best foot forward, if you will, of what they're thinking, this is how I can best try and comprehend what on the surface is very mercurial behavior.
So, Bala, and I want to get your take on it as well, because considering the happenings at the G7 summit and the comments made about India as well and other trade partners, What do you make of, the significance of the G7 as a bloc per se? Because, I mean, some would say that Trump has completely junked the significance of the G7 as a group.
I would say the significance of the G7 is even greater in light of the behavior of the United States at the G7 meeting. It's very, friends need friends. And when you most need a friend to tell you that you have erred, that you've done something wrong and you need to be gently admonished. And I think that's the way I would read what the G6 has done. I mean, they're not saying that they've all of a sudden turned into enemies of the United States. They're saying, look, this is not the behavior we expect of you. We expect leadership of you. And I think we need them all the more, and the world needs them all the more. Otherwise, think of it the opposite. If the G7 is no longer important, then what are we to say we're reverting to a unipolar world? Well, that's something that I think none of us really want to see. We want that little bit of multipolarity and diffuse centers of power where we talk to each other and get that correction that we need from each other.
I just want to come back to Trump and Kim and what we could possibly see there. Now, this is a situation where both leaders are, in a sense, equally unpredictable because we've not seen much of Kim Jong-un on, a global diplomatic scale. Per se, and this is a meeting that Trump has already called off and then he's agreed to again. Do you think that the United States has enough leverage to get Kim Jong-un to agree to the demands, which at this point is complete denuclearization, which they might just not agree to?
Well, our leverage, American leverage on North Korea has traditionally been through China, to push China to rein in North Korea's behavior. We've also, of course, used sanctions, but the sanctions have their leaks through both China and Russia. Direct pressure on North Korea is very, very limited, and we've seen that has often worked against us. So, and the other problem here is our main lever points, China and Russia, especially China, are not countries that are well disposed to us now, given the 301 action. I guess the way I would put it is a more coordinated, synthetic approach to pressuring North Korea and dealing with North Korea that would have enveloped trade and national security and sanctions policy would have made it a lot easier for me to say to your answer, yes, we have the leverage. Right now, I'm not sure.
All right, Ms. But I just want to get Ms. Deo in on this as well. Ma'am, considering all the rhetoric and the conversation about India and this whole situation, how would, the international community be viewing some of those comments made on India? And we're going to talk about it, of course, considering, putting both of these things into context. One, of course, the G7 summit, and secondly, of course, the fact that he is in Asia now and there's going to be a meeting in Singapore. What do we make out of the comments made about India?
Look, I want to say two things. One is that I think we should also understand that with such an unpredictable president, maybe that was a signal also to China that if he is willing to take on his longtime allies, he will be willing to take on China in similarly or even more brutal ways in their differences on trade. That's one aspect, as plausible as the rest of the arguments made around that summit. The second thing is, yes, the president is here in Asia. Right now, his focus is on denuclearization and on North Korea. I think there's no clarity at all. We are all guessing in the dark on how this may go. The best that India and everybody else can hope for is some vague statement at the end of this about North Korea agreeing to denuclearize in clearly verifiable and ways. And a statement that the United States will, more or less the Iran deal, that the United States will in tandem try to reduce the economic pressure. Will either of them have meaning for India? Yes, of course. We know that North Korea has been one of the suppliers of nuclear technology, missiles, everything to Pakistan. We are very interested in how North Korea proceeds from here. Our own Minister of State for External Affairs has just visited Pyongyang a couple of weeks ago. And just before that, 4-5 months ago, our Foreign Secretary had also made a visit. So we are very interested in the outcome. Specifically on which comments regarding India you are referring to, I'm not aware.
Just one last question, Mr. Bhala, is that all of the bluster and all of the aggression that President Trump has brought to G7 and even ahead of the meet in Singapore with Kim Jong-un, how does how does the audience back home look at it? Are his supporters really happy about it? How is it being received back home?
Well, I think it's received predictably by the different constituencies. The supporters of the president, they say, yes, this is great. He's arguing America first aggressively. This is what we voted for. The opponents of the president have said, see, this is more proof that in November, we need to make sure that the Democrats retake the House. So there's a good check and balance on the executive branch. One quick point I might add on North Korea is I would watch for some of what have been traditional American red lines. That is the presence of U.S. troops in Korea and in the DMZ. That the idea of withdrawing them, that's a red line. And also looking out for the security interests of our friends and allies, Japan, South Korea, and India, as the ambassador quite rightly pointed out. So those are some points to watch and see, because I don't see us negotiating those away.
Thank you so much, Raj Bhala, and of course, Ambassador Deo, for speaking with us today and explaining to us what we can expect to see. Actually, no one can quite guess what we will see in Singapore over the next few hours, actually, but we'll be keeping you posted on all the latest on Bloomberg Quint. Now, Indian markets eked out marginal gains ahead of the inflation data. Both the indices traded firmly before pairing gains in the last hour. Agam Vakil now sums up the day's action.
Well, we did see the benchmark indices advance by as much as 0.1% for the Sensex, and the Nifty up as much as 0.2%. And the real support came in from various sectors. This time it was the Nifty Pharma Index up 0.5%, and the Nifty PSU Banking Index also aiding the markets upwards. In terms of the key index movers, the key index gainers, in this case we saw Bharti Airtel move up by as much as 3%, and Bajaj Finance continuing to move from strength to strength, now well above the mark of 2250. On the losing end, however, there was weakness in Tata Steel, essentially in the last 1 hour of trade, and ACL Technologies grinding lower by as much as 2%. The broader markets too, there were mixed trends coming through when it comes to the advanced decline ratio, but Alembic Pharma on one of its US FDA node up as much as 19%, and Manali Petro also advancing by as much as 10%. Can we expect a repeat of today's day of trade? Let's wait and watch.
Now, the battle for supremacy in the Indian telecom market is intensifying, with Airtel finally gaining market share for the first time in the fourth quarter of FY18. Have a look at this special report. Now let's move on to today's top national news story. The Samajwadi Party's Akhilesh Yadav has made it clear that his party wants to continue the alliance with Mayawati's BSP in the national elections. Speaking at a public meeting yesterday, Akhilesh said that his party is even ready to give up a few seats to the BSP to ensure that the opposition is united.
और मैं आज कहता हूं कि बहुजन समाज पार्टी से गठबंधन रहेगा और अगर 2-4 सीटें आगे पीछे भी रहेंगी और त्याग भी करना पड़ेगा तो हम समाजवादी लोग पीछे नहीं हटने वाले। हम बीजेपी को या बहुत नीचे लाने का काम करेंगे। अब बीजेपी की चिंता है कि ये दोनों कैसे करेंगे हिसाब किताब। अगर हम गठबंधन ऊपर कर रहे हैं तो हमारे कार्यकर्ताओं की भी जिम्मेदारी है नीचे करेंगे कि उन लोगों का साथ देकर के उनके साथ खड़े होकर के उनका साथ लेना है हमें और आपको।
अखिलेश यादव जी बहुत मंझे हुए राजनीतिज्ञ हैं और वो अपने राजनीतिक दल का निर्णय स्वयं करेंगे। ना कांग्रेस निर्णय कर सकती ना बसपा, और वो अपने विवेक से सही निर्णय करेंगे। सवाल बड़ा सीधा है, उत्तर प्रदेश हो या बाकी का देश, निर्णय किसी को हराने या जिताने के लिए नहीं होगा। एक बात अब स्पष्ट है कि मोदी और भाजपा देश के लिए हानिकारक हैं। ये विघटनकारी विचारधारा देश को पीछे लेकर जा रही है।
यह भाजपा को हराने के लिए गठबंधन है, जबकि आज भाजपा मुद्दों के साथ देश की जनता के साथ खड़ी है। किसान, नौजवान, बेरोजगार, दलित, मजदूर, यही नहीं अन्य सभी वर्ग और समाज के लोग आज भारतीय जनता पार्टी और देश के प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के विकास के एजेंडे के साथ खड़ी है।
All right, what does it mean when Akhilesh Yadav says he's willing to give up a few seats to keep the alliance between the SP and the BSP intact in 2019 in the state of Uttar Pradesh? Most populous state, sends the most seats to the Lok Sabha. Well, Radhika Ramaseshan, consulting editor at the Business Standard, joins us now for her view on that story. Thank you so much for speaking with us here at Bloomberg Quint. Mayawati has made it clear that she is not going to give in. Do you think that this shows to the extent at which the opposition will unite to keep the BJP as weak as possible?
Yeah, a quick point here. You know, when the SP and the BSP got together for the Gorakhpur and Phulpur by-elections, it was not as though Mayawati and Akhilesh, it was some kind of a grand reunion between Mayawati and Akhilesh. There was tremendous pressure from the workers, from the cadre, from the local units of each party, which is why they were forced to have some kind of an understanding. Well, you didn't see the same clarity in the recent by-elections in Kairana and Nurpur, but even then my own understanding is that both Akhilesh and Mayawati are under enormous pressure from their respective cadres to have some kind of a reunion, because if you look closely at the statistics in the Kairana and Nurpur elections, the BJP is quite a formidable force even now. I mean, the RLD and the SP got together, the Congress didn't field a candidate, Mayawati didn't field a candidate. Even so, the margin of difference in votes polled was not very big, which just goes to show that a combined opposition is just about able to take the BJP on in Uttar Pradesh. Therefore, I think Akhilesh has figured out that if he doesn't yield to Mayawati's demands, doesn't indulge her and decides to go alone, he would probably be confronted with a repeat of 2014, which is virtually drawing a blank. Well, if not a blank, he's certainly not going to get the number of seats he is looking at. And from the national perspective, I think it's very important for Mayawati to keep herself focused as a national player. There is already a suggestion that she should be projected as the candidate of the opposition. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to come in. I just wanted to come in to understand that what in this equation seems to be giving Mayawati the upper hand, considering the relatively dismal performance of the BSP in the last few elections, Assembly and National, compared to the SP. Why is it today that Akhilesh is willing to say, okay, the BSP can have more seats?
Yeah, it's partly symbolic, it's partly substantial. Look, the Dalit votes are spread equally, almost equally across all the 80 constituencies, Lok Sabha constituencies in Uttar Pradesh. Big or small, the Dalit votes do make a big difference. They kind of tilt the balance between defeat and victory. And in the 2014 elections, as well as the 2012 assembly elections, a considerable chunk of the Dalits broke away from the BSP and voted the BJP. So Mayawati's Dalit constituency is very important. She has to fortify that constituency before she sort of attempts to project herself nationally. But whereas Akhilesh's votes are not of the same measure in every constituency. I mean, there are constituencies where the Yadavs are in a majority, and combined with the Muslims, they do ensure a victory of sorts. But Mayawati's presence is both symbolic and substantive, and it is the Dalits. And it, moreover, it will also send a signal nationally. You know, I mean, at this point, it's very important for the opposition to harp on the alleged anti-BJP character of the BJP, and so therefore Mayawati comes in pretty useful, I think, pretty handy to the opposition at this point.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Radhika Ramaseshan there with her analysis of what this really means. The fact that former Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Akhilesh Yadav, is on record saying that he is willing to take a hit on the number of seats but wants to stay in an alliance with Mayawati's BSP is fairly significant. That's all the time we have on Prime Time. But up next on Prime Time Debate, we're talking about the circular from the DOPT, which has caused a flutter within the bureaucracy. The government is hiring. They want private talent. They've asked for people to apply to positions for 10 joint secretaries in various sectors. They want experts, but there is uneasiness in some sections about this. What's all the fuss about? Well, we'll tell you next when we speak with MF Farooqui, former Telecom Secretary and former Ambassador KC Singh.